You're listening to the Business Communicators, presented by IABC Houston. And now your hosts, Austin Stetton, Hattie Horn, and Thomas Bain.
Welcome to Season 3, Episode 24 of the Business Communicators, a podcast presented by IABC Houston. My name is Austin Stetton, joined alongside my co-host, Hattie Horn and Thomas Bain on this journey as we explore the world of communications and the key issues and trends that impact us as communications professionals. And of course, we are the number one podcast for all communications professionals. And we took last week off. I had a massive strain in my neck, pinched nerve. Didn't really feel that good. Didn't really want to be up all night editing and podcasting. So we're back. We're back. Hattie, how's it going?
It's going. I'm just so happy because I'm finally going to get my house back in a couple of weeks. With repairs, but it's going well.
That's good. That's good to hear. Thomas, how's the new gig? How is being back in the office?
The new gig's going good. We're slowly starting to move back into the office a couple of days a week. I was in 3 times a week this past week, and so it's going good. The collaboration is there. Trying to build some really good things. I'm excited that the home buying's moving along. But deep down inside, I really missed you two last week. I hope all of our listeners get as much joy out of listening to us talk about the topics as I do us talking about the topics. Just it keeps me relevant and current and things that I don't necessarily think about every day of the week.
Yeah, it's definitely fun to have the group thread that we do going back and forth. And, I felt bad like the last 2 days because I see all these messages coming in and I just didn't even have time to respond to anything just because we were on the road in San Antonio doing crisis training and it's chaotic. But glad to be back with everyone. Glad to be back. And we have a fun episode today. We're going to talk about the new CDC guidelines for COVID-19 and mask that came out last week. And we're going to talk about the Colonial Pipeline, which was hacked also last week. And if we have time, Thomas wants us to talk a little bit about TikTok, so we'll try to get to that if we do have time for this podcast. But if you want to follow our work, we just encourage you to search at Biz Communicator on all of the social media platforms. And of course, we want to thank our sponsors, Pierpont Communications, Mike Rance & Co., and IABC Houston for making this podcast possible. But let's start off with the CDC. Thursday, May 13th, the CDC announced that if you were vaccinated, fully vaccinated, you did not have to wear a mask anymore. Just days before, they were saying that you had to wear a mask if you were fully vaccinated, and they had just removed restrictions on wearing a mask outside. Now, while all three of us are fully vaccinated, I think that we've understood really over the last 5 months that there has been a lot of communication issues surrounding the COVID-19 pandemic, whether it's from the government to the public, whether it's from the media to the public, or even the CDC. And it's something that's not just unique to the United States. I mean, this is happening in Europe as well, especially with the vaccine rollout. And my take on this is that maybe it's causing too much confusion. And the lack of clear and consistent communications is maybe, pushing some people that are hesitant about getting this vaccine to the mindset of, hey, I'm not going to get this. Thomas, I'm going to start with you because you've got the background working in healthcare. What's your take on the the inconsistency from the CDC?
I don't think it's just the CDC. First off, we have to remember that the CDC is supposed to be an independent operations in the United States. So not determining who's the president, not determining what the political party, or not determining what the flavor of the month is. What they say should be what we should follow. But then also comes the fact is that with COVID this time last year, there were so many unknowns. The mortality rate, morbidity rate was super high. How do we treat someone here? How do we treat someone there? Do we need to wear masks? Do we not need to wear masks? Do we need to save the PPE for the things? So we need to be a little bit cognizant of the unknown and how things change. But with that being said, the CDC should also take ownership and responsibility to come out and say, look, there's a lot we don't know. These guidelines are protecting us right now. You can't go back and judge us what we said 6 months ago, a year ago, or whenever it was. And they have to say that this is how it's going through, and here's the research that comes from it. But then part of it also is the misinformation from social media and the news, is because, one little segment of truth, and we've talked about that multiple times on this website or on this podcast about the changing of, well, I heard so and so did this, and so it doesn't matter to me, so they're wrong, so I'm going to start doing Facebook. So I think I think the CDC should be more concise in how they're precising their messaging and saying, look, we are learning as we go. Here are the guidelines as we know them right now. Here's the safety as we know them right now. And then to try to get a cadence, crisis management. We're going to talk every Monday, or we're going to talk every Wednesday, and not, hey, we're going to put out new stuff every 2 seconds.
I was thinking more in terms of how companies may approach this. I know the CDC, and they're saying, they're going to follow all these guidelines. I don't see companies jumping to change their protocols right away themselves, or communicating different protocols. Just because the CDC is saying that. I agree that the CDC needs to have more of a cadence, and they also need to be more consistent in terms, but I think they don't know what they don't know until they know it. And that's why they're communicating the way that they are.
Agreed. And I think they should call it out as, hey, we're still learning as we go.
I don't think they're going to say that. But the woman, the CDC director, she has been very transparent, I believe. Much more transparent than other folks in the past who have been talking about this. So I give her credit where credit is due, and I give her the benefit of the doubt. As for coming up with a list of how, when, what, where, and whoever, if she is that person who is the spokesperson sharing this information on a regular basis or on a daily basis, whoever is working with her and whoever they're sharing this information with, they also need to be consistent in terms of what they're doing. And that's not what we're having right now. It's confusing because no one is consistent. I just say corporations need to stay the course on what their protocols are to create some stability and consistency for their employees who are coming to work until it is all figured out in more of a better flow or in terms of seamlessness with the CDC itself.
Yeah, I mean, but that's the problem. The CDC is not consistent, and the entire time businesses have said that they're going to follow guidelines of the CDC and government officials, and there's a lot of flip-flopping going on. So now I think the CDC is putting, businesses in a tough spot. It's like, what do we do? Because our customers are saying, look, I'm vaccinated. I don't understand why I have to wear a mask anymore. I trust in the science of the vaccines. And then, but, then they have other customers that are like, look, I'm only going to come if everyone's wearing a mask or everyone's vaccinated. So they're putting businesses in a tough spot. And I think that's going to be a challenge. But I think the problem with the CDC is I don't know that they've been fully transparent with all the information that they have, because there's been a lot of inconsistencies and a lot of information that's come out over the last few weeks about, them potentially being lobbied by the teachers unions when it comes to sending kids back to school, and maybe manipulating some of the data when it comes to transmission rates outdoors. That has been, there's been scientific papers that have showed that, for the last several months that transmission rates were, essentially, I don't want to say zero, but pretty dang close to zero when it comes to outdoors and being, distance from people. And the CDC said that, as recently as 2 weeks ago, that number could have been as high as 10% for transmission rates. And so there's a gap somewhere. And I don't know where that gap's coming from. I don't know if it has to do with research, but I do find it absolutely fascinating. And just to go, peek behind the curtain, for IABC Houston, we're considering having in-person events soon. And I think the first one that we're considering having is potentially a happy hour in July. And this happy hour would be outside, let's call it, somewhere like Kirby Ice House or the Rustic, somewhere with an indoor-outdoor environment. And we sent a survey out to members of IABC Houston to gauge their thoughts on whether or not we should, if they'd be comfortable or not. And the feedback, I don't think it's going to be anything surprising. I mean, it was a mixed bag. You had folks say that they weren't comfortable going back in public until, COVID was eradicated. And then you had people saying, well, we should have never stopped in-person events. And then you had people suggesting that IBC Houston make sure that everyone's vaccinated that shows up to these events. And then you have people saying that, masks should be required, no food should be served. And so it's a tough spot. I mean, everyone's going to have a different opinion when it comes to COVID-19. And I think the problem is over the last year, we've been told, listen to the scientists, the experts, the CDC, Dr. Fauci, and the messaging has just been inconsistent. I think that's where people are kind of stepping back and saying, well, what is the truth?
Also, you got to think about a couple other things too. Even though the CDC has established this mandate, also remember that folks are following their local guidelines as well. And some local folks are doing things, they're being a little bit more prudent or stringent and still requiring masks everywhere just because the CDC says you don't. But that's been happening from day one. If you remember, CDC, here are your guidelines here, la la la. And then you have local guidelines that folks are also being asked to follow. And I noticed that local seems to be a little bit more conservative in terms of, well, not as conservative. They're very strong on still doing the mask in terms, because even when they came out with that.
Only in Harris County though. And so for context, we live in Harris County, or most of us. I don't know, Thomas, what county you're in.
I'm in Brazoria by about 10 feet.
Yeah. Okay. So in Harris County is like the only county in the state of Texas that is still at like level 4 or code red. And there's been a lot of pushback from both Republicans and Democrats, for Judge Hidalgo and her takes on that. But you go to any of these surrounding counties in the greater Houston area, you go to Montgomery County, you go to Fort Bend County, Brazoria County, Galveston County, it's definitely not as restrictive in terms of mask ordinances or mask policies. It's kind of interesting. I was in Nueces County last week in San Antonio, and I was a little shocked because we were at a restaurant for dinner, and none of the wait staff, none of the bartenders were wearing masks. And I was like, whoa, this is different. I'm not used to this. So I think Houston in particular is a lot different than the rest of the state of Texas.
I was in Clearwater, Florida a week ago, and 2 weeks ago now, and the outdoor bars and things like that. And one of the things that we have to remember is we're talking to counties, we're talking to government. It's still up to your employer or the owner of the company to set those guidelines. And so it comes down to how much are they going to enforce? Because I remember going to like a beachside bar and grabbing a drink, and the person behind it was mad that they had to wear a mask even though she was vaccinated and everything. And it was because it was the policy of the company at the time. But come to the rescue of the CDC. They do a lot of really, really good research. I hope that they're not listening to the teachers' unions and other stuff like that. And you have to remember that while they are spending a lot of resources on COVID, they're also researching STDs and the flu and every other possible illness that can come through and how we can stay healthy. And so I my hat tips off to some people I know at the CDC at what they're doing. Just let's get their communication efforts a little bit better.
Also, too, what we didn't mention is they're relaxing some of these mandates as well, too, because they're looking at it as an incentive for more people to get the vaccine. And I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, that's very true. Even when it comes to travel. I mean, you look at the European Union, they've announced that they're going to start allowing Americans to come into the EU sometime during the summer. They haven't been specific on when they're going to fully roll it out, but they've said they're going to allow Americans to come in only if they've got that CDC vaccine card. And I think that's interesting because I know there's a lot of people that want to travel abroad and they're not going to be able to if they don't have, that vaccine. I know someone who is wanting to go to Japan, not me. I mean, I'm going, but I know someone that wants to go to Japan around the time that I'm going next year, and this person has no intent on getting a vaccine, and the person has already booked their flight, and I told them there's zero chance that you're getting into the country without a vaccine. Like, if you think the U.S. is restrictive, wait until you go to Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore. It's a completely different ballgame.
Yeah, and various industries are asking folks because as part of my travel, you have the cruise industry. They're going to be requiring up to 95% of their staff to be vaccinated, and up to 90% of travelers. Now that may change and go up. Hopefully it will. But who knows? It's just interesting how the industries are changing because they want to get back out there and get the economy moving again, and people are going stir crazy and they're ready to go on vacation and do things.
It's interesting you say the cruise industry because I think last week or 2 weeks ago, one of the cruise lines said we're not going to go to a state unless we can ask to see vaccine records. And it's a major destination that for cruise ports, and they're straight up saying we will take the loss of not having it because we want our ships to be safe. So I applaud any company that's going to take a stand and say this is what we're going to do and not change the rules as they feel fit.
I agree.
Yeah, it's
because you also got to remember a cruise ship is a confined space.
And that was one of the starts of it. Like I think when they were saying about the mortality rate, it was like here's this country, here's this cruise ship was like number 3 for like the first 6 weeks of the COVID.
Yeah, that was pretty wild. I mean, because that's the thing. It's a petri dish. I mean, you're just packed in there like sardines, and viruses can spread in an instant. And I mean, even prior to COVID, that was the case. You know, I think there was like the norovirus that norovirus spreads often on cruises. But it's going to be interesting to follow what the guidance is, especially as more and more people get vaccinated. But I think the takeaway for me is that, you know, COVID-19 is not over. I mean, we look at the numbers in India right now, and they're absolutely devastating. We are very fortunate here in the U.S. to be able to have access to vaccines. And we are very thankful for that. You know, even in Europe, even in, you know, most of the first world right now, they don't have easy access to vaccines. And they're not expected to get access to vaccines on a more broader level until the end of this year at the earliest. So we are far from through with this. We are just very fortunate that we happen to live in a country by just pure luck that we were able to get a vaccine. So that's my take on that. So, but I do want to, you know, kind of pivot here. There's another big story that hit the U.S. this past week, and that was the Colonial Pipeline. And if you're not familiar with the Colonial Pipeline, I believe it runs from Houston all the way to New Jersey, and it primarily supplies gasoline, jet fuel for a lot of the southeast portions of the United States. And there was a cyber attack from a ransomware group called DarkSide, which has ties to Eastern Europe, and they took over. Hacked the Colonial Pipeline, the infrastructure, essentially halted the pipeline. You know, they couldn't move product, they couldn't move hydrocarbons. And I immediately texted a few friends that I know that live on the East Coast, and I texted them, I think Sunday morning, and I said, hey, if your car is not full right now with gas, just go ahead and top it off. And my rationale for saying that was I understand supply and demand, and there would probably be at least a minor price hike when it comes to fuel prices, you know, whether it was 15 cents a gallon, 20 cents a gallon, something like that. So I was like, just save a little bit of money now. I didn't expect the panic buying that we saw on the East Coast, in Atlanta, in Charlotte, other parts of the East Coast. Some of the entire cities, I think there were numbers as high as like 70% of gas stations were without fuel. I mean, it was just incredible. They had to start for flights that were originating out of Atlanta, Hartsfield, flights that are normally direct flights, they had to start adding a stop in like Dallas so they could refuel on the way to the West Coast because they didn't have enough jet fuel. So it was really interesting to see. But the ramification of what I want to talk about today is preparedness and crisis communications. I think that there are a lot of companies that maybe underestimate a crisis. You know, maybe they think, oh, only a crisis can happen in this particular scenario. We're prepared in that regards, but they might overlook something like cybersecurity and hacking. And I think this is a very real threat in 2021 and beyond. And it's something that really all communications professionals should be aware of, because being hacked can happen as it's something as simple as clicking on a link in an email, and then it ruins supply and demand throughout the United States. So, Thomas, Hattie, what's your take on this before we really dive into more of the crisis comms angle?
Every company's now is going to have a cyber training for the next 6 weeks or 18 months or so. Kind of like every time you hear of a data, not a data breach, a break-in of something, all of a sudden that's the new hot topic that we have to worry about. And so while I do think companies need to focus on it, I also think that they need to also think about other crises that come into play. But it's really interesting. Austin, I can't believe you didn't see the panic buying when we bought toilet paper a year ago. One of the things that really disconcerts me is some of the people who weren't following safety in those cities and filling up tubs or trash bags with gasoline. Not safety, because I think on Friday I saw 2 articles about people driving off and getting in car accidents and burning. So please use your minds when you come into panic buying. But I'm looking forward to the crisis conversation topic as we get to there. So Hattie?
For companies who are vigilant about looking out for cyber attacks, you have to applaud them, and have training and make sure that their employees are paying attention, and they have different types of tests. I know, the company that former company we work with was very vigilant about firewalls abound, and for this company not to even have something like that, I don't know that they do communication board. I think it what it does, it makes you really appreciate those companies that do focus on that. But they also are going to even be more apprehensive because there's even more cyber attacks on the horizon. This isn't just a tech issue either. So with that said, communicating and being prepared and planning is so important. And this raised so many red flags for me. When I read the story, I'm like, where are their folks? Whether they're internal folks or do they even have an agency on the side that they're working with? Talk to them about this kind of thing. Maybe not.
So if you go back and listen to some of our archives on season 2, episode 13 of the podcast, I believe I released that episode in August 2020. That was a very interesting conversation. We spoke with Angela Hahn and Brad Culp. And Angela Hahn, she, I guess, used to work for the FBI, and now she works for a third-party company that deals with cybersecurity and energy infrastructure. And then Brad Culp, he basically is the top FBI guy within the Houston region. And it was a very fascinating conversation just to hear how much of a threat cyber was to businesses and public institutions and how vulnerable so many of these companies are to potential hackers. And I guess the big takeaway here was that we needed more collaboration, that businesses needed to share intelligence with one another to ensure that they were mitigating any potential attacks that were coming in from Russia, from China, from North Korea, from Iran, because those are, primarily where a lot of these cyber attacks are coming from. But it's interesting. And in 2019, Google's threat analysis group reported over 40,000 nation-state hacking attempts in that year. 40,000 different attacks. I mean, it's just incredible in 2019, and it's only becoming more and more prevalent. But you look at, some of the data. I think what this shows you is that the United States is still vulnerable from a energy, attack. Whether it's with a pipeline, whether it's through a power grid. This is something that we've got to be aware of. So you should, if you're a communications professional, start making these contingency plans. I mean, here in Texas, we've seen it. We've seen floods. We've seen panic buying at gas stations here. We've seen power outages for 3 days during a winter storm. You should be prepared for the worst. You should be game planning for the worst case scenario. And hopefully you never have to go through these plans, but you should at least start to war game them. And, I think a lot of people were caught off guard last year in 2020 with COVID-19. in the pandemic. It was how do you respond to a potential viral disease spreading offshore on one of your platforms. A lot of these companies did not have contingency plans. And so we saw these companies come together, share knowledge, share resources, what was working, what wasn't working, because they realized this is a bigger issue that is not just impacting my company, it's impacting all of us. So we have to work together to potentially stop this crisis. But interestingly enough, just one more fact before I toss it back over to Thomas. It looks like he's ready to jump in with a hot take. But the Colonial Pipeline, I believe they finally have control of it, and they are starting to restore the distribution of the hydrocarbons, but it's going to take a few days for it to fully restart and get underway. But it's a 5,500-mile pipeline. Each day, it transports over 100 million gallons. That's incredible. 100 million gallons.
It kind of shows you how fragile our systems are, because there's not like a secondary pipeline or anything like that. I remember hearing Jeff Bezos is building a secondary boat for his boat that has a helipad for crisis for his yachts.
I would love to be in that position, by the way. I would love to be in that position.
And then part two is I'm so thankful that we live in today's world where we have just information at our fingertips. Because while we were sitting here talking, I did just a quick Google search on DarkSide. And while Colonial paid $5 million, they're estimating that DarkSide has collected almost $69 million in the past 12 months. So the Colonial is just a small fraction of it. And I think, Austin, you hit the nail on the head when you said we need to share the information. I've consulted with a couple different companies over the past probably 5 years or so. And it's amazing at how many people that you learn that company XYZ has been hacked, but they don't want to talk about it because then all of a sudden it opens them up for more threats. But yet it's probably the same hacker group that hit them that hit another group that I talked to or another group that I talked to. And I'm like, if we would share or have a central repository of, hey, this is what's going on, then maybe we could try to fend off a little bit better. And so yeah, hacking, it's heartbreaking because you hear about hospitals who have to get it and electronic medical records, and they have to pay the ransom almost immediately because they don't have the backup systems. And that cost-benefit analysis is what's the cost of a new server to back up all of your stuff versus paying a one-time fee of a couple $1,000,000.
Collaboration, work together. It's not that hard, Hattie.
Knowledge is key, sharing the knowledge and the best practices and helping each other out when it comes to this. So I'm hoping that the lesson learned, because the takeaway from me is I'm sure it's a big lesson learned for Colonial, and hopefully they are talking to their counterparts and colleagues as to, how to minimize this kind of attack down the road. That I don't know how much they're going to be able to prevent it because I don't know what type of resources that they have, but I think that they should bolster up their resources. But I'm hoping that they're all getting together and they are talking about this, because this can't happen again at the magnitude that it happened or ever. So communication is key. Talk, communicate, collaborate, get it done.
Some of these smaller companies, like a pipeline company, a midstream company, they might not have a ton of employees, and they might be mostly focused on doing what they do best. And that's, monitoring the lines, that's restoring them. But they might not have a huge focus on communications. And I think if you're dealing with something as important as energy, infrastructure, something that has a larger impact on society than just your business and selling everyday products, if you don't have a communications team, you should at least talk to a consultant, somebody that you can have on standby as, for crisis management, someone that can help you with a crisis plan, someone that can help you with crisis training. Because if you do get in this situation, you want to be prepared. You don't want to be running through, Google trying to find a company that can help you. You want to know which company you can trust to help you. Establish those priorities, call in the experts, and make sure that you're sending the right message to, your stakeholders, to your company, and people that were potentially impacted. So that's my takeaway. Always be prepared, and it's easier said than done.
And my takeaway is the preparation on it, is the training, the internal comms, is that remember, you can have the best firewalls in the world, you can have the best policies in the world, but at the end of the day, it's the people, it's the humans is where most of the violations come from. Clicking on that link in the thing, which takes us to the next topic about TikTok and the news. You like that segue? Ta-da! Taking us.
That was my
TikTok.
take at the whoa. I don't know if I got it, but
TikTok is companies are coming out saying do not let people log on to different things using TikTok. So basically what it boils down to is when you go to a website to make a purchase, you see log in with your Google account, log in with your Apple account, log in with your Facebook account, log in with your TikTok account. When you click on those, there's a lot of fine print and sharing of information that goes back and forth. So those companies, in essence, have free reign at your social media there. And to quote Austin, TikTok's not going to watch itself, but at the same token, TikTok's information is still collecting on you and passing on their information. And so when we're talking about the people side of it, there was a study done in 2016, in New York, where these researchers created a fake social network called Name Drop. Perfect name for it. I think it's awesome. But before you logged on, you had to agree to their terms. And in their terms was, we're going to share 100% of our information with the NSA on you. And also as payment, we're going to take the firstborn child. Out of everybody who signed up, 98% of the people didn't even see the thing about the giving the firstborn kid, or 1 out of 500 saw the NSA thing that raised the flag about it. So when you're training your people, remember that there's those terms and agreements. So 2 parts, read those, and 2, don't click on every link that comes in the email.
Reading the terms and agreements, it's something that I should probably be better at. There's actually a TikTok account that I follow. I can't remember the guy's name, but he actually reads all of the terms and agreements for everything, and then he goes into like analysis behind them, and it's just so fascinating. Like, if you want to nerd out, like, that's the way to do it. It's just incredibly fascinating. But when you talk about logging into apps, again, this is something that we've talked about multiple times on the podcast. You go back to season 1, episode 15. There's a Netflix documentary called The Great Hack, and Professor David Carroll, who is a huge focal point of that documentary on Netflix, was on our podcast, and he was discussing, the cyber threats, the logging in, how much data and information companies have on you. And, especially, I think there's more of an added risk when it's a company owned by potentially a bad actor. I'm not saying TikTok is a bad actor, but, they are financed a little bit by the Chinese government, which, some might say is a bad actor, especially when it comes to cybersecurity. But yeah, just be cautious about all of that. If you don't read the terms and agreements, someone else is. At least Google it. Google the terms and agreements. Someone's gonna take the time to read that and write, 200 words on what you need to know about the latest update. I mean, that happens all the time. So, Hattie, are you gonna log in with your TikTok account anywhere?
Absolutely not. But I will say this, y'all. Given that it's interesting. TikTok has so many users. A lot of them who are very young, who are not going to read these agreements in the first place. They're going to check that box that says I accept or what have you, just to move on to get in. And then if they want to get onto something else and they decide to use TikTok or whatever, everything is about convenience. They're using the easiest way that's going to get them in, and somehow that's going to get missed anyway. So given that your data, it says that, the apps that allow TikTok login will be able to see the user's public profile and public videos.
It's interesting that you mentioned the age element of TikTok. So TikTok, if you're 13 years old, you can download TikTok and you can start an account. There's a I guess, a watchdog group called Common Sense, which says they recommend TikTok for ages 15 and up, mainly due to the mature content that is on the on the platform. But if you look at the actual numbers of people that are on TikTok, there are millions of people, millions of users that are under the age of 13, under the age of 12,
Absolutely.
under the age of 10. So just as Hattie said, these kids who are signing up when they're not supposed to, they're lying about their age, they're volunteering this information, just because it's the new viral trend.
So privacy's gone out of the window anyway. Parents want to make sure that everything is private, and they want to make sure that their kids are safe and things. And they try to monitor their accounts, but it's really interesting that Austin said, you gonna they lie about it. And their parents don't know everything that they're doing.
Yeah.
I mean, our parents didn't know everything that we were doing.
What?
But we didn't have all that back then either. But
and now that we're all in the same house, your kids are doing it on your work computer, and
yeah,
and you get where that one's going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the takeaways here: read the terms and agreement, use common sense,
or at least Google the terms and agreement. I mean, if
Yeah.
you don't want to read the full thing,
Parents, monitor your children's accounts.
it's not that hard. All right, to wrap up the show. We've got 5 minutes left on the show. We are going to go to our weekly writing prompts, and to save time, I have flipped to a page, and I think this is a good one. This week's prompt: describe your brainstorm sessions. Describe your brainstorm sessions. And Hattie, I know that you are one of the most creative people that I know. So tell me what Hattie does when it comes to brainstorming. What's your process like?
I have brain farts all day. Starting early in the morning when I'm taking a walk around my neighborhood and I'm listening to music. And there may be a certain song that comes on and it'll prompt me, oh, you know what? This is a blog post, or, oh, this is something I need to get up in here and read. So my process is very fluid. I start early in the morning, come up with a lot of different things, and I'll pitch it to myself. Is this something I want to do? I'll pitch it to myself. And why do I want to do it? And how does it need to work? And all of this. And then if I boil it down to 3 things. I may come up with 20 different things, but I'll try to boil it down to 3 things that I can do in one day.
I like it. Thomas, what's your brainstorm and creative process like?
I really have 2. One is probably private, so like Hattie's point. First off, in both of them, I like to set a timeline. So my brainstorm over for personal takes about a week because of the same things. Inspiration hits me like listening to a song, walking, talking to y'all. But I want to say, okay, at the end of this is when we're going to take all the ideas and we're going to start to cull them down, saying, okay, this one's not going to work, this one's going to work, this one's going to work. And then in the work setting, I like to get everybody in the room. Whiteboards are a huge fan of mine. I love whiteboards. And we start putting things out there. And we go through the process of, okay, for the next 10 minutes, no ideas off the table. How crazy can we get? In fact, I prefer how crazy you can get. And then we try to say, okay, then we'll go through the culling process. But my brainstorm sessions is literally no ideas too crazy and setting a deadline or a timeline on it. We're going to end this brainstorm session at XYZ because you want to take it from just a brainstorm to an actual how can we accomplish this.
I think brainstorming and whiteboarding sessions are really good because when you can visualize something, you can see it on a board and you can say, all right, maybe we should talk about this as well. Maybe we should talk about that. So I think that's very helpful. When I'm taking notes at the office, the way my notebook is set up, I've got like a main column where I take, relevant notes to, whatever the meeting is that we're on, whatever the key action items, and then anything that I know that I need to take away, whether maybe it's an action item, but maybe if it's an action item or a new idea, I will take a different color pen, and in the margins, I've got like another line drawn, and then I'll write something in the margins in a completely different color. So I know that all right, that sticks out for a reason. I'll go back and reference that. But like Hattie, for me, music is so incredibly important when it comes to brainstorming. I mean, sometimes I will just put these headphones on, put on Spotify, blast some dance music or some classic rock, and I will just start thinking of different ideas. And then it just goes down to a rabbit hole. And then the next thing I know, it's 4 a.m. and I have to get up at 7:30 in the morning for a meeting. So that's how brainstorming sessions work for me. They can happen at all hours of the day, but unfortunately they seem to mostly happen after midnight, which is probably why I don't sleep the most effectively and why sometimes I text Thomas after midnight. So that's how things happen.
I have the same problem, Austin, and that's why. So I guess on mine, I also like to group them. So I'll do like 3 or 4 brainstorming sessions on certain things at any given time, and I'll find that there will be a common thread that kind of goes through all of them because point A that's not necessarily tied to point C, but there could be something I could take away from it.
So let us know. what's your brainstorming and creative process like? What does it look like? How do you work with teams? How do you work with friends? How do you collaborate? How do you get to that next level? Let us know. Drop it in the comments below. Of course, if you want to follow our work, just search @BizCommunicator on all the social media platforms. You can visit our website, thebusinesscommunicators.com. And of course, thanks to the sponsors of this show. That's Pierpont Communications, Mike Rance & Co., and IBC Houston. And Thomas, Hattie, it was so great to be with you both this week on camera for the Business Communicators podcast. We hope that our listeners enjoyed this episode. We've got a long weekend coming up, so enjoy the Memorial Day weekend. Hopefully I have the timing right when you're listening to this episode. Yeah. No, I'm about a week off. So you're listening to this episode on tax day, the 17th of May, and I guess Memorial Day is in 2 weeks. So best of luck during tax day.
See, you're planning ahead.
Yeah, exactly. So on behalf of my co-hosts this week, Hattie Horn, Thomas Bain, my name's Austin Staton. We'll see you next week.
You've been listening to the Business Communicators. If you haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe to our podcast on iTunes and leave us a 5-star review.